The explanation of Isaiah, of Yeshayahu, is that we haven't yet fixed the desire to receive, the desire to give. When we actually give to the needy and feed the hungry and clothe the naked, and that becomes the dominant theme of our lives, then we will see the end of chronic diseases and suffering.
Well, what about how is what is your understanding of, let's say, the full world today? Why there's so much lack of this basic understanding of the idea of giving in order to receive, in order for the flow to exist. And you just have to look around and just see how much. I mean, it's very sad that there's so much, whatever it's obesity or whatever, it's conditions that people have. This is lack of understanding that it would seem to be apparent from Tanakh and from that doesn't exist. I mean, even the Rambam is very clear about undereating, for example, is the key to health. How do you explain that? How do you understand that as far as the sociological?
This problem in that we're focusing on just the desire to receive is manifested in many levels. One is our relationship to food, relationship to eating, and two is, of course, on a spiritual level as well. But also not understanding the effects of the desire to receive and how powerful those effects are. By not understanding that and correcting that, then we're also victims of that will to receive that was being expressed even by somebody else or by many people or by corporations, etc. So, for example, if the food that we're eating is a byproduct of a spiritual problem, which was rooted in selfishness and greed, and just look around, the production of most of the foods that we're eating is a byproduct of selfishness and greed. So, unfortunately, since we're one soul ultimately, that we unfortunately experience all the side effects of this mistaken spiritual state of mind of just of greed and selfishness. So these are byproducts of greed and selfishness and the desire to receive for oneself alone. So part of our work is to backtrack and to understand the source of what we're seeing in front of us. Where did it come from? What was the intention behind this thing that we're associated with or that we're eating? And if we find that the source and the original intention is rooted in greed and selfishness, then you know that's something you need to stay away from.
This is our Bala Bayat. You know, thank you so much for having us.
What was that third example you gave us for?
It says, when you listen to God's voice, again, and you pay attention to His commandments, all the afflictions and the suffering and the diseases that you experienced in Egypt, you will no longer ever experience. So basically there's a link between keeping the Torah and disease and suffering as well, and the end of the disease and suffering.
I understand that there was another example you gave after that. There was a third.
And then there was one, and then there's a reference in the Shema that when we keep the commandments, and again, remember what is the purpose of the commandments according to Rabbi Ashlag, is a transformation of the desire, the will to receive to the will to give. So when we keep those commandments, then we will see a healed ecosystem. That's what it says in V'hayom Shemoah. And then in Isaiah, it's written in black and white, but unfortunately most people mistakenly think that it's just poetry, that he's just talking as a prophet. He's not giving us a real definition of healing. He says very clearly that when you heal, when you give to the needy, when you feed the hungry and you clothe the naked, then healing will spring forth in your land.
I don't have the question fully formed when we try it anyhow. Since God has a lot more ability to give than a human being does, I'm not sure what the question is. Humans can't give like God. We don't have the same ability, for better words.
Well, in the end we will, because remember the analogy of the host and the guest. When the guest refuses enough times, the host has it wells up in him such a great desire to give, and the guest, when the guest finally accepts to receive, the host becomes the receiver, because now all of a sudden he feels so grateful, so happy that the guest accepted his invitation.
So in the short run, it's going to feel like you're giving that you're not getting, but actually by giving you'll feel you're getting.
Yeah, because God has such a great desire to give to us, like this host, right? He's like this host. And when we finally decide to receive, but our intention is so that we give, we do it because we want God to feel that happiness. We want the host to feel the happiness. We become actually givers to God. So in the end, we will be one with Him, that our ability to give will be as great as God's ability to give. That's a high level.
Two questions. One thing was, you said that when we're eating food today, that the intention of whatever the food was, whoever produced it, might not be totally good. But how do we have no way of really knowing if it's good or bad? There's just no way to know that.
Well, we do if we do our homework. Rabbi Ashlag basically sets the guidelines to understand what could be potentially dangerous for us, what could potentially hurt us, and what could potentially cause disease and suffering. It depends on the intention and of the initial act. So, for example, the whole controversy, I was just reading about this, the whole controversy of fluoride in our water. It goes back all the way into the 40s. If you do enough homework, you'll see that the main reason why our water was fluoridated was not because they really cared to prevent cavities, because they conveniently overlooked many studies to show that it doesn't make a difference, fluoride in the water, that it does not help in terms of preventing of cavities, but also the few studies that did show that there was some benefit was not the type of fluoride that was ultimately dumped into our water supply. Totally different type of fluoride. And the main reason why fluoride was dumped into our water supply was because many different corporations that were producing toxic fluoride needed a place to dump it and to get rid of it. So they figured, well, let's just make believe that this is something healthy for people, even though it was not the exact same type of fluoride that a few studies showed might have been somewhat beneficial. So they dumped it into our water supply, even though there were many studies to show that fluoride, even at that time, when they originally fluoridated the water, that fluoride is a potential carcinogen. So what was their original intention when they fluoridated our water supply? Was it pure? The
thing here is that from a practical standpoint, I don't think practical for people to know like everything that they eat, to research what this company did or what this restaurant did or whoever along the chain produced the food, to know like what their intention was. There may have been people along the way who had good intention, there may have been people who had bad, there might be even a mixture. So
right.
I really know that's one point. The other thing is, you mentioned that you have to have a certain intention when you're eating the food, because that's making the blessed is just the beginning.
Mhm.
So I'm just curious, like, what do you think about if you're eating, let's say, a sandwich? What's your